15 years ago, she gave her heart to a man who promised her the world, only to be left with nothing but betrayal. He was powerful, untouchable, the CEO whose decisions could destroy lives with the stroke of a pen. And for her, that betrayal was more than heartbreak. It was the end of everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and survival. She walked away carrying scars no one could see, determined never to look back. But destiny had other plans. When their paths crossed again after 15 long years, a hidden truth surfaced, one so shocking it shattered everything they both believed. The secret he kept buried would change their lives forever. She was just 23 when her life first brushed against his. Young, ambitious, and carrying dreams bigger than her means, she had come to the city with little more than determination in her pocket. The city was sharp and unkind, filled with glass towers that glittered like promises and sidewalks that cracked beneath weary feet. Yet she believed she could carve out her place there, if only she worked hard enough. Her name was Maya. She grew up in a small town where whispers of what a woman should be chased her from one corner to the next. She was told to keep her head down, to accept limitations, to be grateful for the little she had. But Maya carried within her a restless fire, a certainty that she was meant for more than quiet obedience. That fire is what brought her to the steps of Kingswell Industries, one of the largest corporations in the city. She was only an assistant in the marketing department, another face in a sea of workers whose names hardly registered with those at the top. But she worked with a kind of precision and drive that didn't go unnoticed. That was when she met him, Jonathan Whitaker, the CEO. His presence was commanding, tall, immaculately dressed, with a voice that carried the weight of authority. He was the type of man who seemed untouchable, as though the world bent itself around him. For most, he was a figure glimpsed only in news articles or on television screens. Yet for Maya, he became something far more dangerous, a living, breathing temptation. Their first encounter was accidental. She had been carrying a stack of files through the lobby when the elevator doors slid open, and there he was. She froze, nearly dropping the papers, but he caught one before it hit the floor. "Steady," he said with the kind of smile that disarmed even the most guarded. From that moment, their paths crossed more frequently. At first it was small acknowledgements, a nod in the hallway, a brief word of thanks during presentations. But soon, it became dinners under the guise of mentorship, long conversations that stretched past office hours, and the kind of lingering glances that made boundaries blur. Maya resisted at first. She knew the risks, the power imbalance, the whispers that would follow. But Jonathan had a way of making her feel seen, as though she was not just another employee, but someone whose mind, opinions, and dreams mattered. He told her she was brilliant, that her ideas could change the company, that she was destined for greatness. And against her better judgment, she believed him. Their relationship deepened in secret. Behind boardroom doors and away from the polished halls of Kingswell, he showed her a softer side, or at least what she thought was softness. He spoke of loneliness, of the burden of power, of the need for someone who understood him beyond the surface. Maya, with her open heart, gave him all of herself. She trusted him, loved him, and in quiet moments, even imagined a future by his side. But power has a way of revealing true character. The cracks began small, promises broken, meetings cancelled without explanation, the way he pulled away whenever others were near, the way he spoke of her in private, but never acknowledged her in public. Maya told herself these were sacrifices, temporary measures for a love that would one day be free. She clung to hope with both hands, convincing herself that patience would be rewarded. The truth arrived like a storm. One evening, after weeks of distance and silence, she decided to confront him. She arrived at one of his charity galas uninvited, dressed in a simple black gown, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and longing. She only wanted answers, reassurance that what they had was real. What she found instead was betrayal laid bare. Jonathan stood on stage, his arm draped around another woman, elegant, wealthy, and very much his fiancée. The crowd erupted in applause as he introduced her as the future Mrs. Whitaker. Cameras flashed. Champagne glasses clinked, and in that glittering room, Maya's world crumbled. She tried to leave quietly, but the whispers began. Someone recognized her. Someone else pieced together the truth. By the time she slipped out into the cold night, rumors had already begun circulating. She was branded a fool, a mistake, a cautionary tale of ambition tangled with desire. Jonathan never spoke to her again. No apology, no explanation, not even a denial. To him, she had simply been a secret folded into his past, disposable, forgettable, and unworthy of acknowledgement. For Maya, the betrayal was not only personal but devastatingly public. She left Kingswell Industries within weeks. Her career, once promising, was shadowed by scandal. Job offers disappeared, friendships fractured, and the city that once felt like possibility became a cage of humiliation. She returned to her small apartment, packed away the remnants of that chapter, and swore never to let herself be used again. For years, she lived with the weight of that betrayal. She worked small jobs, piecing her life back together one fragile step at a time. She avoided places where she might hear his name, turned off the television when his face appeared, and buried every trace of him deep within the corners of memory. But wounds have a way of lingering, even when hidden. 15 years passed. Maya was no longer the wide-eyed young woman she once was. Life had carved strength into her bones, resilience into her spirit. She carried herself with quiet confidence now, the kind earned through struggle and survival. Yet beneath that strength, the scar remained. And then came the reunion. It was supposed to be just another professional conference, a networking event she attended on behalf of the non-profit she now worked for. She had rebuilt her career in the world of advocacy, using her pain as fuel to fight for women like herself, those who had been silenced or discarded by men in power. She never expected to see him there. But as she entered the grand ballroom, the air thick with chatter and clinking glasses, her gaze locked on a figure across the room, older now, with silver at his temples, but unmistakable. Jonathan Whitaker, the man who had once destroyed her life. And in that moment, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had spent 15 years burying the past, convincing herself she had moved on. Yet seeing him again was like reopening an old wound. But this time something was different. This time she carried truths of her own, and Jonathan carried a secret that was about to unravel everything. The air in the ballroom seemed to thicken as Maya's eyes locked on Jonathan. Time folded in on itself, dragging her back to nights of whispered promises and mornings of silence. For a heartbeat, she felt like the 23-year-old girl she used to be, naive, trusting, fragile. But she quickly reminded herself she was no longer that woman. Still, the sight of him was jarring. Jonathan had aged, but gracefully. His presence commanded attention the way it always had. He stood surrounded by executives and politicians, smiling the same polished smile that once disarmed her. Yet there was a hollowness in his expression she hadn't noticed before, a strain hidden behind the charm. Maya's instinct was to leave. She could slip out unnoticed, protect the life she had rebuilt, and keep the wound from reopening. But something inside her refused. This conference was not his. It was hers. She had earned her place here, representing her non-profit with pride. She would not run this time. So she stayed. Throughout the evening she avoided his direct gaze, though she sensed his awareness. Once across the room, his eyes flickered toward her. It was only for a second, but the recognition was unmistakable. He knew. He remembered. The conference stretched over 3 days, filled with keynote speeches, networking sessions, and panels. Maya found herself constantly brushing against the edges of Jonathan's world. He was on the main stage speaking about leadership in modern business. She was on a panel about corporate accountability. The irony was not lost on her. Each encounter stirred old emotions, anger, hurt, a flicker of the affection she thought long dead. But beneath it all was something else, curiosity. Why was he here at this particular event? Jonathan Whitaker had once been a titan of industry, his empire unshakable. Yet whispers in the hallways hinted at decline. Failed ventures, boardroom scandals, lawsuits quietly settled. The man who once seemed untouchable was no longer invincible. One evening, after delivering a speech that earned her a standing ovation, Maya stepped outside for air. The city skyline glittered in the distance, 1,000 windows glowing like stars. And there he was, Jonathan. Alone, leaning against a balcony rail, staring out into the night as if the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. Their eyes met. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, filled with 15 years of unspoken words. He opened his mouth as though to speak, but Maya turned away. She wasn't ready, yet fate had other plans. The following day, she was invited to a private roundtable discussion with high-profile attendees. To her surprise, Jonathan was seated directly across from her. The air between them crackled with tension, though no one else seemed to notice. She spoke passionately about ethical leadership, about how corporations had a duty to protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. Her words, though general, carried an edge aimed directly at him. Jonathan listened intently, his expression unreadable. When it was his turn to speak, he praised her work, his voice smooth but tinged with something softer. Regret, guilt. She couldn't tell. Later, as the room emptied, he approached her. Maya, he said quietly. Just her name, but it landed like a stone in her chest. She wanted to ignore him, to keep walking, but years of unanswered questions rooted her to the spot. She turned, her gaze sharp. You look well, he continued, though the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Her reply was cold, measured. 15 years, Jonathan. And that's all you have to say? For the first time, she saw cracks in his polished facade. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickered downward. But before he could answer, another attendee approached, and the moment shattered. That night, Maya lay awake in her hotel room, replaying the encounter. She had sworn never to give him another thought, yet here she was, restless, consumed. What unsettled her most was the way he looked at her, not with arrogance, but with something else entirely. A man carrying secrets. The next day, the truth began to unravel. Maya attended a luncheon hosted by a philanthropic foundation. As speeches began, a slideshow of honorees flashed across the screen. To her shock, she saw a familiar face, a young woman named Alina Whitaker. The caption read, Founder of the Whitaker Initiative for Social Equity. Whitaker. The resemblance was undeniable. Alina had Jonathan's eyes, his posture, his smile. But she also had something else. Maya's fire. A chill ran through Maya's body. Could it be? No, impossible. Jonathan had never spoken of children. And yet the math aligned. Alina was in her teens, perhaps early 20s, the timeline dangerously close to when Maya's world collapsed. Her hands trembled as she set down her glass. She felt the room spin, the conversations around her blurring into white noise. Was Jonathan hiding more than betrayal? The puzzle pieces began to arrange themselves in her mind. The secrecy of their relationship, his sudden withdrawal, the public engagement, the years of silence. Could it be that Jonathan had been protecting not just his reputation, but something deeper? The thought consumed her. When the luncheon ended, she lingered, hoping for clarity. As guests filtered out, she caught sight of Jonathan speaking to Alina in the corner. His hand rested gently on the young woman's shoulder, paternal and proud. Alina smiled at him the way only a daughter smiles at her father. Maya's chest tightened. She couldn't breathe. That night, Jonathan sent a note to her hotel room. A handwritten note, deliberate, intimate. It read, Maya, I know I owe you more than words can give. Please, one conversation. Tomorrow evening. The balcony at 9. J. She stared at the paper for what felt like hours. Every instinct told her to ignore it, to guard the life she had built. But another voice, quieter yet persistent, whispered, The truth will set you free. And so, she decided to go. The following evening, the city stretched out beneath her once more. Maya stood on the balcony, heart pounding, waiting. Jonathan arrived, looking heavier than she remembered, as though years of silence had weighed him down. For a long time, neither spoke. Then finally he said, I never stopped thinking about you. Maya's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. You left me. You humiliated me. You destroyed my life, I know, he whispered, and I have lived with that every day. But there are things you don't know, Maya. Things I couldn't tell you then. He paused, eyes fixed on the skyline. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about protecting her. The word hit Maya like a lightning strike. Her suspicion deepened, clawing at her chest. She thought of Alina's face, her resemblance, the timeline. She wanted to demand the truth, to scream, to unravel every hidden layer. But Jonathan's voice trembled, carrying a weight she had never heard before. I failed you, Maya, he continued. But everything I did was for her, for family. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Family. The answers were close now, dangerously close. The betrayal she thought she understood was only the surface of something far more complicated and far more devastating. For the first time in 15 years, she realized the story wasn't finished. It was only beginning. The final night of the conference arrived with an air of grandeur. Crystal chandeliers glittered above the ballroom, music floated through the air, and the city's most powerful mingled in their finest. To the outside world, it was a celebration of leadership and progress. For Maya, it was a battlefield. She hadn't wanted to attend, but she knew this evening held answers. The note Jonathan left her still burned in her purse, heavy as stone. She hadn't confronted him after their balcony meeting. Not yet. But now, with the world watching, with Alina present as a keynote speaker, the threads of secrecy felt too tightly pulled to stay hidden. Something was going to snap. Maya took her seat at the round table near the front. As the program unfolded, she found her eyes drawn again and again to Alina. The young woman stood at the podium, her voice confident, her passion undeniable. She spoke about equity, about lifting others, about justice denied. Every word echoed Maya's own fight, her own mission. It was like watching a mirror of her younger self, sharpened and refined. And then Alina said something that froze Maya's blood. My father taught me that silence protects no one. Truth, no matter how painful, sets us free. The crowd applauded warmly. Jonathan, seated proudly beside the stage, forced a smile. But Maya saw it. The twitch of his jaw, the unease in his eyes. Her suspicions hardened into certainty. Alina was not just his daughter. She was their daughter. 15 years of questions roared back at once. The nights Jonathan disappeared. The betrayal that felt too sudden. The pieces all fell into place. He hadn't left her for ambition alone. He had hidden a child. Her child. Maya's hands clenched the tablecloth, her heart slamming against her ribs. When the applause died, the moderator opened the floor for acknowledgments. Jonathan rose, his voice smooth, his presence commanding as he praised his daughter. He spoke of legacy, of sacrifice, of mistakes made in the name of family. It was too much. Maya stood. The scrape of her chair echoed in the hushed room. All eyes turned toward her. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of a storm. You speak of sacrifice, Jonathan. You speak of family. But tell us, how much truth have you buried to protect your empire? The room stilled. Jonathan froze, his practiced composure cracking under the intensity of her gaze. Maya, he started, his tone warning, pleading. No, she interrupted. Not this time. 15 years ago, you destroyed me to keep your secrets. But tonight, I see the truth standing right in front of me. Gasps rippled through the audience. Alina turned, her eyes wide, confusion painted across her face. Maya stepped forward, her voice rising with each word. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You left me with nothing but scars. And all these years I thought it was ambition, pride, ego. But it wasn't, was it? It was her. Alina's lips parted. Her gaze flicked between Jonathan and Maya, searching for answers. Jonathan's mask shattered. His shoulders sagged, his eyes glistened with guilt. He whispered, barely audible. Maya, please. Tell her, Maya demanded, her voice like thunder. Tell her the truth you buried for 15 years. The ballroom was silent, every guest suspended in breathless anticipation. Jonathan looked at his daughter, then at Maya. His lips trembled as if the words were poison on his tongue. Finally, his voice broke. She's right. The room erupted in gasps. Alina's eyes filled with tears, her hands trembling at her sides. Maya is your mother. The words rang out like a verdict. The chandeliers, the music, the polished grandeur, all of it faded into background noise. Only the truth remained, jagged and raw. Maya's knees nearly buckled. For years she had dreamed of answers, but hearing them aloud was like being struck by lightning. She searched Alina's face, desperate for recognition, but the girl looked shattered, betrayed by both parents in one breath. "Why?" Alina's voice trembled, fragile and broken. "Why would you hide this from me?" Jonathan reached for her, but she recoiled. "I thought I was protecting you," he stammered. "Protecting us. At the time, the scandal would have destroyed everything. My company, my name, your future. You chose yourself," Maya spat, her voice sharp as glass. "You chose power over love, over truth, over your own family." The audience murmured, their admiration for Jonathan dissolving into whispers of judgment. The mighty CEO, brought low by his own deception. Alina's tears fell freely now. "You lied to me. My whole life, a lie." She turned to Maya, her voice cracking. "And you're my mother." Maya's heart ached as she nodded. "Yes, Alina, I wanted you, I loved you, but I was never given the chance to hold you. He took that from me." The confession spilled into the room, raw and devastating. Guests turned in their seats, scandal spreading like wildfire. Photographers lifted their cameras, capturing the downfall of a man who once seemed untouchable. Jonathan's empire, his reputation, his carefully built facade. It was all unraveling under the weight of truth. For Maya, the climax was not triumph, but release. The secret she had carried unknowingly for 15 years was finally exposed. Her pain, her betrayal, her stolen motherhood, laid bare before the world, and for Jonathan, the reckoning had come. He stood, broken, his empire collapsing not with the strike of a pen, but with the voice of the woman he had betrayed. The room thundered with whispers, the spectacle unforgettable. But at the center of it all, 3 lives stood shattered. A woman who had been silenced, a man undone by his own choices, and a daughter whose identity had been stolen by lies. The truth was out. There was no turning back. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. The glittering chandeliers, the polished silver, the murmurs of admiration, all of it had dissolved into a low hum of scandal. Guests whispered behind manicured hands, reporters scribbled furiously, and cameras flashed as though documenting the fall of a dynasty. At the center of it all, Maya stood tall. Her heart pounded, her hands shook, but she refused to break. For 15 years, Jonathan Whitaker had stolen her truth. Now it belonged to her again. Alina's face was pale, her tears fresh. She stood, trembling between the man she had always called father and the woman who had just been revealed as her true mother. Her world had shifted in a matter of breaths, and Maya's heart shattered at the confusion etched into her daughter's features. Jonathan tried to speak, but his words faltered. "Alina, please. I did what I thought was best." But Alina stepped back. "You lied. My whole life has been a lie." Her voice, though fragile, carried through the room, slicing deeper than any accusation from Maya ever could. The weight of betrayal came not just from the past, but from the present moment, the realization that her identity had been built on deception. Maya longed to hold her, to explain, to pour out the truth of her love. But she knew Alina wasn't ready. Instead, she stood silently, offering only the steadiness of her presence. She would not force the connection, not after so many years stolen. Jonathan turned to the crowd, as if seeking refuge in the same audience that once worshipped him, but the faces that met his gaze no longer reflected admiration. They reflected judgment, curiosity, disdain. The empire he had built on charm and control crumbled under the weight of exposure. One of his board members rose quietly from the table and left. Then another. The cracks in his kingdom widened. By morning, Maya knew the headlines would tell the story. Whitaker's secret family scandal rocks empire. But for Maya, it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. The days after, in the days that followed, Jonathan's world unraveled. Sponsors withdrew, shareholders demanded answers, and the board called an emergency meeting to discuss his removal. his carefully constructed facade, had collapsed in a single evening, undone not by a competitor but by his own past. Maya, however, found herself walking a different path. Reporters clamored for her side of the story, but she refused interviews. She had no interest in turning her pain into spectacle. Instead, she focused on her non-profit, her work, her healing. For years, she had defined herself by what had been taken from her. Now, she chose to define herself by what she was building. Still, one wound remained. Alina. The young woman hadn't spoken to either of them since that night. She skipped scheduled appearances, avoided phone calls, and vanished into the quiet anonymity of her university campus. Maya respected her silence but ached for connection. She wrote letters, not emails, not texts, but handwritten letters. She told Alina about her childhood, her dreams, the nights she had spent wondering what became of the child she was forced to lose. She told her about the love that had never faded, the prayers whispered into the dark. And then she left the letters unsealed, waiting for the day her daughter might be ready to read them. For Jonathan, the downfall was swift. Within weeks, he was removed as CEO. His name was dragged across headlines, his legacy dismantled piece by piece. What he had sacrificed everything to protect slipped through his fingers like sand. In private, he reached out to Maya. Once, twice, 3 times. She ignored him each time. Not out of hatred, though the wounds still bled, but because she finally understood. His presence no longer defined her story. She had survived without him for 15 years. She would not let him anchor her again. Months passed before Maya finally saw Alina again. It wasn't planned. Maya was speaking at a community event, a small gathering in a church basement, nothing like the glittering conference halls where they had first collided. She finished her talk and noticed a young woman lingering at the back of the room. Alina. Her face was cautious, her eyes rimmed with the memory of hurt. But she had come. Slowly, she approached. "I read your letters," she whispered. Maya's heart leapt. "And?" Alina hesitated. "I don't know how to feel. I'm angry. I'm confused. But I believe you. I believe you loved me." Tears blurred Maya's vision as she reached out, carefully, gently. This time, Alina didn't pull away. Their hands touched, tentative, but real. It wasn't a resolution. It was a beginning. In time, Alina chose her own path. She continued her advocacy work, but with a sharper edge, a deeper fire. Her speeches carried the weight of betrayal, of resilience, of the importance of truth. She often spoke of hidden stories, of silenced voices, never naming her own, but always channeling the lessons she had learned. Maya watched from the sidelines with pride. Their relationship grew in fragments, coffee dates, long walks, cautious conversations. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but it was being rebuilt. And that was enough. Jonathan, meanwhile, faded from the public eye. Stripped of power, wealth, and reputation, he became a man haunted by his own choices. Occasionally, Maya heard whispers of him trying to rebuild, but his name carried a shadow that never lifted. In the end, his greatest loss wasn't his empire. It was the family he could have had if he had chosen differently. For Maya, the journey came full circle, not with vengeance, but with clarity. She had been betrayed, silenced, erased, but she had risen anyway. The truth had cost her years, but it had also freed her. Standing at a podium months later, she told an audience, "Justice isn't always found in the courts or the boardrooms. Sometimes justice is simply truth brought into the light. For 15 years I lived under a shadow, but shadows only exist where there is light, and the light always wins." The crowd erupted in applause, but Maya's smile was quiet, private, because she knew the real victory wasn't applause or recognition. It was the small, steady bond growing with her daughter. The empire had fallen. The lies had burned away, but love Love had endured, and that was the truth no one could bury again.